When you think about television history, one name towers above them all: Ed Sullivan. A man so powerful that a single invitation to his show could turn an unknown singer into a global legend overnight. But what most people don't know is that behind his stiff face and conservative values, Sullivan was constantly fighting fierce battles against the very stars who defined an era. Stay with me until the very end, because the names and scandals I'm about to reveal will shock you. And only then will you understand how rock and roll truly conquered America. Ed Sullivan was a devout Catholic who saw himself as a wall against moral decay. To him, rock and roll was noise, chaos, and above all, a dangerous influence on American youth. Yet ironically, it was his own stage that became the launchpad for the rebels who shattered those old values. The first great clash? Elvis Presley, the man whose hip movements alone were called obscene, vulgar, even the collapse of civilization. Ed once swore Elvis would never appear on his show. But when the ratings exploded everywhere Elvis performed, Sullivan faced a choice: cling to morality and risk irrelevance, or embrace the rebel and keep his throne as kingmaker of TV. In a shocking turnaround, Sullivan signed Elvis for the then record sum of $50,000. But even then, he tried to control him, forcing cameras to shoot only from the waist up. It didn't matter. On September 9, 1956, Elvis sang "Don't Be Cruel, Love Me Tender," and "Hound Dog." 60 million Americans watched, over 80% of the entire TV audience. The nation froze, families argued, pastors condemned, and teenagers screamed. And in that one night, the balance of power shifted. Sullivan thought he had tamed Elvis, but really, Elvis had conquered television itself. If Elvis cracked the door open, then what came next blew it off the hinges. February 9, 1964, the Beatles walked onto Ed Sullivan's stage, and America would never be the same again. Nearly one-third of the nation gathered around their televisions. Teenage girls screamed until their throats went raw, while parents stared in confusion at four shaggy-haired boys from Liverpool. That night wasn't just a performance. It was an invasion, the British invasion, and it rewrote the rules of popular culture. Sullivan tried to keep control. He ordered them into neat suits, demanded their set list in advance, and insisted on good behavior. On the surface, they nodded politely. But behind the scenes, John Lennon mocked Sullivan's stiff gestures, Ringo tapped cheeky rhythms during rehearsals, and Paul and George laughed until they broke the solemn atmosphere Sullivan craved. Even on live television, their playful irreverence shone through. They weren't afraid of him at all, and America could feel it. Still, when they launched into "All My Loving," "Till There Was You," "She Loves You," and finally, "I Want to Hold Your Hand," the studio erupted in hysteria. The screams drowned out the music, microphones strained to capture their voices, and security struggled to contain fans desperate to storm the stage. Sullivan scowled, but the ratings shattered records. He had no choice but to invite them back again and again. For advertisers, the Beatles were gold. For teenagers, they were heroes. And for Ed Sullivan, they were both his triumph and his torment. The more they teased him, the more America loved them. With every mischievous grin and every screaming fan, the Beatles turned Ed Sullivan's carefully controlled stage into ground zero for a cultural revolution. Just when Ed Sullivan thought he had seen it all, another storm crashed onto his stage, the Rolling Stones. Where the Beatles brought cheeky charm, the Stones brought raw defiance. From the moment they appeared, chaos followed. Girls screamed, shoved, and wept so wildly that security lost control. America had never seen such disorder in their living rooms. Sullivan, usually calm, nearly fainted that night. Furious, he declared, "They will never set foot on my stage again. Never." But as always, ratings told a different story. The more he hated them, the more young audiences adored them. Their most infamous clash came with the song "Let's Spend the Night Together." Sullivan found the lyric indecent for family television and ordered Mick Jagger to change it to "Let's Spend Some Time Together." Reluctantly, Jagger agreed, or so Sullivan thought. When the lights went up, Jagger rolled his eyes, smirked, and sneered his way through the censored lyric. It wasn't just a performance. It was a taunt, a slap in the face to censorship, delivered live to millions of Americans. Sullivan was livid. To him, it was open rebellion on his own stage. But to the audience, it was exhilarating. Ratings soared once again. and suddenly the man who had sworn to ban the Stones forever had to swallow his pride and invite them back. Keith Richards later mocked him, saying, "Sullivan needed us more than we needed him." And he was right. The old gatekeeper was powerless against the storm of youth culture. The Stones didn't just sing songs. They embodied the unstoppable energy of a generation that refused to be silenced. And in that moment, Ed Sullivan's fortress of control cracked even deeper. But the most shocking defiance was still to come, with a single forbidden lyric that Jim Morrison refused to change. By the late 1960s, Ed Sullivan had already endured Elvis's hips and the Stones' smirks, but nothing prepared him for the Doors. Their hit Light My Fire was a national sensation, but its lyric, "Girl, we couldn't get much higher," was too provocative for Sullivan's prim standards. He demanded they censor it for the live broadcast. Jim Morrison stood quietly, his sunglasses reflecting the studio lights, and simply said, "Sure." Behind that calm promise, though, was rebellion brewing. The night of the performance, the cameras rolled and millions watched. When Morrison leaned into the microphone, he didn't hesitate. His voice cut through the air, steady and unapologetic. "Girl, we couldn't get much higher." The word higher echoed like a shot. Sullivan's staff froze. Producers panicked. But Morrison just kept going, his presence filling the stage with a daring electricity. He didn't blink, didn't compromise. He had defied the nation's most powerful gatekeeper, live and with absolute confidence. Backstage, Sullivan was incandescent with rage. He vowed the Doors would never perform here again. But Morrison only laughed. To him, this wasn't a loss, it was victory. By refusing to censor his art, he had shown millions of young viewers that no authority could muzzle their generation's voice. The ban only made the Doors more legendary, while Sullivan once again looked like a relic clinging to fading control. That night, a line was crossed. It wasn't just about a lyric. It was about a new era announcing itself, one where art belonged to the youth, not the gatekeepers. With one word, Morrison had shattered the illusion of control that Sullivan desperately tried to uphold. And soon after, another performer would tear through Sullivan's stage, not with lyrics, but with movement so explosive it shook the very meaning of performance. In the end, history made its choice, and it chose rock, not Ed Sullivan. He could ban, he could scold, he could mutter his disapproval. None of it mattered. Every act of defiance that passed across his stage only grew larger with time. When James Brown dropped into the splits, drenched in sweat, Sullivan trembled backstage. When Mick Jagger smirked into the camera, refusing to play by the rules, Sullivan fumed. Yet those very moments became immortal, burned into the memory of millions. His show, the one he believed he controlled, transformed into a living museum of rebellion. Today, when people recall Ed Sullivan, they don't think of the safe circus acts or the sugary pop singers he loved to showcase. They remember Elvis shot from the waist up, the Beatles singing "I Want to Hold Your Hand," the Stones tweaking their lyrics, the Doors defying orders, James Brown igniting the stage. Images that transcended the man, belonging now to cultural history itself. That is Sullivan's paradox. He lost the fight to preserve order, yet his name is forever tied to the birth of a new culture. He was no pioneer, no songwriter, no trendsetter. He was a stern host, stiff, even awkward. But it was precisely that conservatism that gave rebellion its stage. If Elvis had swiveled anywhere else, it might have been just another show. But within Sullivan's rigid frame, before America's eyes, it became a cultural shockwave. He was the accidental gatekeeper, opening doors he never truly wanted to open. And in doing so, he crowned the very gate crashers he feared. When the curtain finally fell in 1971, rock's storm was already unstoppable. Sullivan's legacy endures, not as the victor, but as the witness to an old world collapsing and a new culture rising.